The sea remembered every oath a man ever broke. It said so in the whisper of the waves below Dragonstone's black skirts, in the hiss where foam caught on basalt and slunk back, and in the slow, patient heartbeat of the tide. Davos Seaworth stood on the wind-scoured parapet above the stone drum and watched the night water shift toward the east like a living thing, immense and indifferent. Lanterns kindled one by one along the sweep of Stannis' ships riding at their anchors, dull eyes reflected in a colder darkness. From here the Black Betha was a squat shadow among shadows, and the men upon her little more than ghosts with hands. Bootsteps rang behind him. He did not turn. He knew that measured stride, the stiffness that was not truly stiffness but a way of moving when one carried weight that could not be put down. "You sent for me, your grace." "I did." Stannis Baratheon came beside him to the parapet and clasped his hands upon the stone as a man who would rather cling than fall. The wind took his cloak and made of it a banner. "The night stinks of fish. This island never ceases stinking, no matter the direction of the wind." "It was good fish," Davos said. "In the right stew." Stannis did not smile. He looked toward the east, where the first suggestion of gray was thickening the black. "My lords would have me weigh anchor at once and drive upon the city. They smell fear and think it the same as prudence. They forget that fear colors foolishness the same as wisdom. The queen takes counsel of her women, the boy of his own cruelty. There will be disorder, and yet..." His mouth thinned as if holding down what he could not bear to spit out. "And yet..." Davos kept his hands at his sides and said nothing. The wind tugged at the ragged glove covering his absent fingers. Around them Dragonstone breathed. The soft hoot of an owl, an iron-bound door groaning, the muttered prayers of sailors taking their turns by the lanterns below. "We will not take King's Landing with a rush," Stannis said. "They have wildfire, a great store of it. The alchemists have been at their labors for months. I do not trust hearsay. I do not trust..." He flicked his fingers as though dismissing gossip. "But Melisandre has seen it in the flames. Ships aflame and the river burning green as poison. The boy and the harlot's dwarf have devised snares. I will not sail my strength into their net." Davos swallowed the taste the word wildfire always brought him. That dim ghost of onion smoke and fear from long ago Storm's End. "Then do not sail into it. Starve them, your grace." Stannis glanced at him, sudden and keen. "You would have me sit like an old man on a bench, counting wounds and waiting for my foe to die of his own rot?" "I would have you win," Davos said. Wind tugged at Stannis's unkempt dark hair and showed the white along his temples. There was an old exhaustion in his eyes, like the exhausted light that comes before dawn, but something else lived beneath it. A rigid, consuming purpose. "At Storm's End you taught me how to eat onions and swallow pride. You would teach me now to eat patience. It serves a man better than wildfire," Davos said, and flinched inwardly for his boldness. "The city is hungry, and thirsty for want of clean wells and peace. Grain comes by sea when it comes at all. The boy king's gold cloaks bleed the city as surely as any army. Close the Blackwater and the gullet both, and the city will feed upon itself. You would have me blockade it. We have ships enough, but theirs would not stay abed while ours wake. There is a chain." "I have heard that." Davos leaned on the stone as if he had any right to lean beside a king. "Your grace, we need more ships for a close ring, ships and men both. Honest sailors with reach hooks and long patience. There is a fleet that could be had, if it were one." Stannis looked out to sea, not at Davos. The word wind curled the corner of his mouth in distaste. "Do not say Tyrell to me, Onion Knight. Do not mouth that name as if it were a prayer. Renly's greened-up boy of flowers rides to wedding with a lion bitch while a true king waits for his due. The reach grows fat on lies. Mace Tyrell is an ornament, no lord." "The Tyrell fleet is red wine," Davos said, careful as a man working a knife close to bone. "The Arbor's galleys are the largest and most numerous in Westeros. Lord Paxter's sons are in King's Landing as hostages. Bring the boys out and you free the father. Free the father and we have his ships. We need not love their grapes to drink their wine." "And how," Stannis said slowly, Would you have me pluck the queen's hostages out of the Red Keep? Should I grow wings? He squinted into the wind as if tasting it. Or would you ask sorcery, Davos? The Lord of Light has other shadows to be cast. The wall calls. I am not blind to the true war, but first the throne that is mine. Davos shook his head. No shadows. It is not needed. A smuggler could do it with eyes and oars and the will to keep his mouth shut. Do you know such a man? Stannis said, and now there was a bone-dry humor in him, a brittle shard showing in the bleakness of his face. Davos bowed his head. I knew one once. He kept onions close and truth closer. If your grace can spare him. Stannis let the wind have his answer for a while. Down on the road, the first of the morning carts creaked toward the harbor, wheels wailing as if in pain. A gull wheeled and cried and was gone. You would go into the lion's mouth, Stannis said at last. You would fetch me 2 boys from cells I cannot even name, in a fortress watched by traitors who would love to see your head upon a spike. And you would do it so that I may have ships enough to sit and count the days while my enemies join their strengths and try to sweep me like dirt from the floor. I would row, Davos said. He did not say that he would do anything Stannis asked of him. He did not need to. It was a thing set between them like a ST. One in a wall, it held up weight. Stannis's mouth tightened. If you go, you will go with my authority, but quietly. A letter under my seal for Paxter Redwine should you succeed. The boys are hostages, but if he does not fear his sons' heads on pikes, he is a father whose trust one do not desire. In return for his fleet he shall have confirmation of his lands, and the office of master of ships when I am seated. And if he speaks to me of Mace Tyrell or of flowers, I will hear him out and do as best suits justice. I will not promise anything to Tyrell that I would not do for any other lord in his place. It will be enough, Davos said, though he did not know if it would be enough for a lord. It would be enough for a father. He will expect proof. I will bring him proof. Go then. Stannis drew breath, let it out in a harsh rasp. The Red Woman says the river will burn green. I am a hard man. I do not like to be instructed, but she has not been wrong. You will go by night and take with you no sign of my colors. Speak to no more men than you require and require no more than you can trust. Salador's tongue is loose as his purse. Enlist him only if you can bind him with coin. Sala's coin is loyal when it is heavy enough, Davos said. He will understand that starving a city breeds prizes. See that he does. Stannis turned away at last. If you fail, Davos, I will not blame you, but I will be left with fewer choices, and I will not be deterred from the one choice that remains. Davos bowed and watched the king's back until the wind had his cloak again and the dark swallowed him. The sea beneath the walls spoke, as it always had, of debts. By midnight he was at the oars in a skiff that had smelled of tar and apples when it came out of the shipwright's hands and smelled now of oil and fear. 2 men went with him. Roland Storm of the Bastard's Boys might have offered himself, had Davos asked, but that would have been a jest. He took instead young Frezin from the Black Betha, who had a way with rope and kept quiet, and a taciturn riverman called Pate who did not drink. Fresh moonlight lay like wet gauze on the water. The gullet was a throat and the skiff an unchewed morsel slipping into it, where the narrows grew narrower and the islands crouched like black backs, and the beacons were stars with iron rungs. They did not fly colors. They did not use lanterns where they could help it. The tide and oars carried them past Driftmark's old towers, past darkened Valerion halls, and into the salt-sour lanes where men dreamed noisy dreams in the rocking bellies of cogs. At some hour that was neither night nor morning, when the moon sat like a coin somebody had tossed and forgotten, they saw the red glow that was the city's heart and its sickness. King's Landing did not sleep. It tossed and muttered against the day. They nosed among anchor chains thick as a woman's thigh, past wine-stained hulls and worm-scabbed, past a fishing boat with a dog that lifted its head and did not bark, and the mud gate's twin towers looming black with windows like blind eyes. On the downstream side the great winch houses hulkied, and the chain lay asleep at the riverbed, and all the night smelled of tallow, bilge, and sour bread. When the tide turns, Davos breathed, "We go." They went with the river under them and the skiff scarce moving relative to the banks. Frezen's hands were sure. Pate had a pole that he used as if he had been born with it. Davos kept the oars steady and the blades quiet. At the piers beyond the mud gate, men were sleeping on coiled cables and under their coats. A few woke and coughed and went to sleep again. The Red Keep's black cliff rose ahead, higher than any ship's mast and pricked with torchlight like a great red-tinged fungus. Davos had seen it once from the river in daylight, a lifetime ago when he ran onions and salt fish up to sell, with fear hot in him and his boys' mouths to think of. From water it had looked like a thing growing out of the rock because it could not help it. At night it was a cliff of fireflies. Here, Pate whispered, and there it was. A cinder-colored arch under the quay where sewage let out, a hole not much bigger than a man's shoulders. Frezen made fast to a ring, and Davos slid into water that was thick and warm and tasted of salt, rot, iron, and old grief. He went in shoulder first so his head would stay dry, pushed his way past slime-slick stones, then went flat and wriggled like a rat until the tunnel widened and he could draw his knees up and stand humped under a vaulted ceiling. He waited. It is a strange thing, to wait in darkness where other men's filth runs, with only the small sound of your own breath and the slap of water to mark time. It presses on a man's chest and makes him want to cough, to say any foolish thing to prove he's not alone in blackness. Davos had waited before, against walls with dying men on the far side, against tides that did not know they carried his life. The patience that had fed Stannis never had fed Davos, but he had learned it out of necessity. Something moved in the black. A lantern hood slid aside for a heartbeat and was shut again, leaving Davos blind, with the lantern's ghost burned into his eyes. "You came," said a man's smooth voice. "So few men come when called, Davos Seaworth, or come for the reasons they claim. But you had the smell of a man who would show up in dung if he said he would. And you have the smell of dung without trying," Davos said, before his wits caught up, and then bit his tongue. Lord. I am no lord," the voice said with a hint of laughter in it. "I am Ruggin, a humble jailer. Or perhaps I am a spider with 100 eyes and no need to creep along beams. Names are like clothes, Davos. We wear what suits. Tonight, let us keep the one I am wearing. It is safer." He guided Davos by the elbow through a gap between walls that had no business being where they were. Once Davos's hip took a knock that made him bite back a curse. Once he had to climb where he should not have been able to climb. Once he waited while feet went overhead and a man with a cough scraped phlegm, spat and cursed a dead wife. When they paused at last, Davos's nose had learned half a dozen different smells of rot, and his breath came as quiet as a monk's prayer. "There are two of them," Ruggin said in the dark. "The boys you seek. Redwine. They look alike and pretend to be different. They have learned to be cheerful. Pleases the queen to see cheer. They were made cupbearers for a time. Now they are kept closer, in case the Lord Father should forget his place. He has a good memory, Lord Paxter, but fathers are predictable creatures. They do so love to count. Can you bring them?" "My dear Davos," the man said, and the endearment soured at once in the sewer air. "What do you take me for? I can open doors that are supposed to stay shut. I cannot walk living boys past crossbowmen and honest men alike. That is what we keep smugglers for. Come." They came to a stretch of wall where a single course of stones was fresh set and damp. Ruggin pushed and a stair came into being, narrow and steep between walls that had been meant to stand after the world rotted, and Davos went up with his fingers spread like spider legs on the stone. At the top there was a door, a thin door bound with iron, and beyond it a narrow passage reeking of rushlights and sour wine, and then a square of torchlit floor with hung tapestries and the sound of a guard's boots walking a pattern. "Wait," Ruggin breathed, and in the waiting Davos tasted onion again and fear, tasted storm's end, tasted all the moments where patience had been nothing but a stretched thread. Ruggin moved like water. He went one way and left silence after him. The guard's steps slowed, stopped. The faint murmur of a voice said something about card games and arsage. No voice answered. The steps resumed, retreated. A key whispered. A hinge answered in an old voice. Ruggin returned with two shapes pressed close to him, boys by the sound of their breath and the way they stumbled trying not to. "Easy," Davos whispered. "Keep close. There's water. Mind your feet. One at a time now. Are you a ghost, sir?" One of the boys breathed. His tone was too light by half, a boy's armor around fear. "Father says a ghost guards our cups. He says it must be a then, else how do they get in and out of stone?" "A poor smuggler," Davos said. "Mind your head." They went down again, down into a world without light, with the stink of all that had ever been thrown away. The boys did not complain. Twice the jailer touched them, and they hushed as if a nurse had laid a hand on them in a cradle. When they came back to the water, the faint gray of the mouth of the tunnel was a blessing beyond prayer. Pate steadied the skiff. Frezin had his hook ready to catch any eddy. Davos pushed the first boy into the boat and felt another pair of hands pull him. He slid in after and tasted the sky as if he had nearly drowned. "Your friends will not follow," Ruggin said in the dark. "They were sleeping soundly when I left them. Such sweetly sleeping men. I envy them." "Go with the gods," Davos said. "Which gods?" The hood flashed a thin spill of light, and Davos saw for an instant a round face beaded with sweat, eyes like polished onyx, and a smile worn like a ring. "All of them, perhaps. I keep a temple in my heart. It has many doors." Then he was gone the way water goes through a sieve. They pushed off. The river was turning, coming awake under them in small shifts of current. The city breathed louder. A dog barked and was hushed. Far off, some alchemist's oversight flared green for a heartbeat and died, and men laughed without pleasure. At the mouth of the tunnel, a boat slid by, low in the water, rowed badly. Davos stilled his men with a finger. The boat drifted. He saw pale faces and a smell came to him, vinegar and something sweet. Wine smugglers, bold as rats. If he had not had boys in the boat, he would have spoken and taken their cargo with a smile. As it was, he did not move. The oars dipped and rose like dark wings. The skiff slid past the piers and under the wide black throat of the mud gate, where no colors hung. On the downstream side, the winch houses watched them with shuttered eyes. Davos's shoulders waited for the feel of a crossbow bolt that did not come. They made for the larger dark that was the greater dark beyond the city, and the river widened and relaxed around them as if letting go. Only when the towers and their torches were behind him did Davos feel that he could breathe like a man again. On the long pull-down river, he learned the boys by the little they said. Horace and Haber, though he had no use for which was which. They were apple-cheeked and lean, like boys who had run often to keep warm, and their laughter perched on fear like a sparrow on a sea cable. "Father will say he could have done it himself," one said. "He says he knows every stitch of the city, though he only ever sees its wine." The other said nothing for a long time, and then in a sudden high childish voice, "They have a man in white who does not blink. He put his hand on my shoulder and I thought it would crush the bone." "Keep low," Davos said. "Keep quiet." They did, and he was suddenly very glad of them, as if saving them made the world less mad for a little while. The Black Betha took them in like a mother bird. Frezin kissed the deck when he had the chance. Sala's green ship with its bright striped awnings took station to seaward of them like a cheerful brigand insisting on sharing the road. Davos sent a lantern hoisted twice, and unseen on Dragonstone a sullen torch waved thrice in answer. Dawn came a thin yellow gray, and with it wind, and with wind the sailcloth speaking its old language. Paxter Redwine wore wine in his flesh as other men wore armor. When he wept he would weep Davos thought, standing in the great arched hall of the arbor with the long windows opening over blue water and white gulls and shipments of casks. But Redwine did not weep when the boys came to him. He made a noise that was more like a man choking on a grape. Then he took one boy in each arm and stood with his head bowed and said nothing for a long time while the boys breathed against him. Davos looked elsewhere. He looked at the way the hall was kept, at green vines worked in paint along beams black with centuries of smoke, at men-at-arms who kept their eyes forward and their mouths set. He had never seen the arbor. He had known its wine all his life, Redwine let go at last, and then took his son's chins in his fat hands and moved their faces this way and that and looked for bruises that were not there. "A cup," he said to no one and everyone. "A cup of my own wine, a cup I pour with my own hand, and bread, and honey, and cheese. You will eat at my table, you will eat every sweet in the pantry until you are sick of it. Do you hear?" His voice cracked. He swallowed. "Lord," Davos said when the man had room for words. "His Grace sends you this." He had the letter with the wax intact, Stannis's crown stag impressed upon the copper-red seal. Redwine's fingers trembled around the parchment in a way he tried to hide. He snapped the seal without ceremony and read with his lips moving. Twice he went back to the beginning and read again. When he was done, he rolled the letter and tapped it against his palm. "You risked much," he said to Davos, as if the paper had not been words at all. "I rode," Davos said. Redwine's mouth twitched. "You saved my boys. You bring me terms." He swallowed again. "My gratitude is not strings upon which any man may play. But there are strings, sire. I am a sworn man. I am the Tyrell's vassal. I served Lord Mace's father and his father before him. My sons." "Your sons are here," Davos said gently. "They are," Redwine said. His eyes were wet now, carefully. "His Grace promises me an office I held once. He promises justice for all, even for Tyrell. Justice is measured by a careful hand, sire. It is not wine one sloshes into a peasant's bowl. Justice must be poured by the drop. But ships can be launched. And hungry men do not count justice. They count loaves." He turned to the boys and cupped their cheeks again, and his voice changed. It went cold and practical under the wine and the gratitude. "Father must step carefully," he said, "that his feet do not go out from under him. But we will step. Hobber, you will take wine to Lord Mace at Bitterbridge and tell him that his vassal begs leave to sweep the pirates from our waters and to show the realm that the Arbor's sons are men, not casks. You will say that we will keep the sea, as his lordship keeps the land. And if he asks where your brother is, tell him that Horus has a belly for the sea and wishes to remember its motions after all that time ashore." "Father," said the boy who must be Hobber, very brave, "if Lord Mace says no, then—" Redwine's small eyes hardened and softened at once. "Then we will do as we must and beg pardon later. It is better to beg for pardon than for sons." He turned to Davos. "Tell his Grace this. The Redwine fleet will sweep the gullet clean. We will feed the reach and starve the city. But I am no fool. The Tyrells are vines. They endure storms by bending. Mace will bend toward the wind that smells of cooks. He will not stand with Joffrey when Joffrey's kitchens are empty. He will not stand with Stannis while Stannis holds a sword over Lord Mace's house and says, 'You may keep it if I please.' He will wait. He will watch my sails. And then he will decide whom to tell he always loved." "His Grace will not pretend love," Davos said. "He will give justice." Redwine sniffed. "Justice sits poorly at feasts, but justice keeps men in bed who would otherwise be dragged into the street. Perhaps I would try justice if I had a different tongue. Tell him I am with him until justice turns to folly. Tell him to keep his red sorceress under her own roof and not aboard any ship of mine." Davos bowed and did not smile. He had learned that the words men spoke after embracing their sons and uncorking their wine were the truest words they had to give. Ships filled the water like leaves at a freshet. The Redwine galleys were fat-bellied and beautiful in an arrogant way, with rams plated bright and oarsmen whose sweat smelled of cloves. They fit into Stannis's lines like a new row of teeth in a mouth that had missing molars. Salador-san watched them with one hand on his hips and one running lovingly over the bright green flank of his galley. "Ah, Davos," he cried.
"Ah, Onion Knight."
"Oh, have you ever seen such a round-bellied flock? They look like fat priests. I could eat them. I could roast them on their own decks with a little bit of that sweet oil they cook in on the arbor." "You'll not eat them," Davos said. "You'll keep station in their lee and pluck what they frighten to flight. And you'll count your coin twice when you have it." "I always count my coin twice," Salador said, offended. It is the only way to be certain you have any. When the unprecedented muster had arranged itself into something that could be called a blockade, galleys in rows like beads on a necklace, with smaller prams to chase and larger carracks to frown, the sea itself seemed to draw a line. The line lay outside the river mouth, not within. If the Lannisters wanted to lift it, they would have to come out from beneath their walls to do it. The chains slept still at the bottom of the Blackwater, and helped no one. Days to the blockade tasted of salt, oil, and waiting. The red wine men were good with or in hook. They caught boats that tried to run out in darkness by listening for them. Great stupid cogs with holds full of wheat that creaked like old men and breathed like beasts. They cut the cables of river barges under cover of night and hauled them sideways in the tide and laughed softly when the gold cloaks shouted from the walls. They lay down with their oars so the sweeps lay like the ribs of a fish, and the wind went by and did not see them. Then they rose like a reef and had their prize. And if two boys on one of the galleys watched everything with their mouths a little open and exchanged whispered comments that made oarsmen grin and glance toward their captain's pavilion, who was counting? They had the prudent patience of men who had seen more than their share of nets. They stayed out of the river's mouth. They kept to water too open for chains. When fire ships came one bright night, it was the red wine galleys that took them, clever as courting players of Sivas. Hooks on the fleur-de-lis prows catching grapnels, oarsmen backing water and then running them downwind past the line so that the wind dragged them open-mouthed toward empty sea, and Sala laughing on his deck and making a show of pissing over the side and shouting rude advice to the alchemist's green tongues. "Do not miss, sweet fire. You will offend me if you miss." There were prizes. Prizes meant coin. Sala's men danced and Davos's men smiled small smiles. But if the blockade made the sea a counting house, the city became a wasp's nest. Word drifted on gull wings. Bred riots at Flea Bottom. The butchers at the shambles had been fighting over a pig stretched between three of them. A baker hanged by his own peel outside his shop. Haleen and his pyromancers speaking wholly against hunger as if words could be eaten. Lord Baelish seen riding out with a light escort toward Bitterbridge and a light smile. Tyrion Lannister's name did not ride every word, but it rode enough. The imp working in his tower with chains and winches. The imp feuding with the queen. The imp's dwarf hands everywhere. The imp offering coin to cut throats. The imp ordering men to dig under the river for something no one could explain. The imp, the imp, the imp, as if he were a curse and a cure both. Davos watched night lighting the city's sky green and thought of the red woman's eyes. It had been a long time since he had truly slept. When he closed his own eyes, he saw from below. Chain links rising, links writhed with flame, ships caught like flies in sap, the mouths of men crying black smoke. He woke with a hand on the pouch at his neck and said the words he had always said. "I am Davos, a poor smuggler, a father of boys." And the sea said back, "You are what your oars make you." Melisandre came to the Black Betha once, borne over in a skiff with two of Queen Celis' women stiff as sausages behind her. The light made a ruby deep in her throat drink blood. She stood on Davos's deck and set her palm against the mast as if it were a living thing she meant to warm. "You have done as you counseled," she said, her voice as smooth as oil on a pond. "You have tied the city by the throat and bid it starve. In the flames I see men tearing bread like cloth and mean dogs gnawing bones. I see a king's landing that is less a king's than a landing ground for crows. It pleases the Lord of Light when false kings are made low. It pleases the Lord of Light to watch men burn," Davos said before he could bridle himself. "It seems to me the Lord of Light is easily pleased." She turned her head and the ruby drank light. "There are darker gods less easily pleased. Before this winter ends you will learn them, Onion Knight. Yet you are not wrong. The fire delights in sacrifice. We are all sacrifices, set upon the world's altar in our seasons. Some burn quick, some slow. It is better to be consumed on purpose than by accident. You hold your oar and think you are different. You are a stake driven into the earth, waiting for a rope and a horse. May the rope snap," Davos said, half under his breath. "It will not," she said, almost kindly. "Yet I told the king to guard his patience. I told him the water would burn, and that he must not set his boats where the green tongues could kiss them. He listened, and that is rare in a king. Be grateful for rare things, Onion Knight. They make up the goodness of the world. I have onions enough, Davos said. I have no need of your goodness. He saw then something like a shadow pass in her eyes, as if she had looked past him and seen a shore she knew would make her cold. No one has enough of goodness, she said. Not even the Lord of Light. That is why night hangs so heavy. Tyrion Lannister's first sortie came on a dawn-streaked ruddiness, with the tide and a wind sweep for a quick dash. 3 Dromans slid out like thieves, low on the water, with sails reefed and oars out, and a thin scatter of escort galleys. Davos could taste the city on the air then. Peppers, piss, boiled bones, 7,000 arguments. The Dromans bloomed suddenly with cats and hogsheads, and the smell that came off them was a cross between good brandy and a blacksmith's shop. The red wine galleys did not move until they moved all at once, oars biting, prows leaping. The fire ships blew their bellies with sparks, and then a squall caught one and shoved it sideways into a wake. The flame leapt and fell and licked and then ate the wrong wood. They burned 2 of their own escorts that morning. The 3rd fire ship struck a red wine galley's bow a glancing kiss that left a smear of green blooming there like pond scum. The oars beat and the water came up and the men threw piss buckets and wine and woolen blankets soaked in vinegar, and the green was smothered like a baby under a pillow, ugly and quick. Davos watched all of it from a place that belonged to him and to no one else, a position in the line set not by rank but by work. He did not speak while men shouted. When the last of the escort galleys had been taken and stripped, he permitted himself one long breath. Why do they try? Frezin muttered. Because the city is hungry, Davos sighed. And because the imp cannot stand to do nothing. The imp was not the only one. In the 3rd week of the ring, a lean column of dust showed at midday up the Rose Road beyond the city, and later word said Randall Tarley's outriders had ridden to the city walls, viewed the blockade, sniffed the wind, and ridden back toward Bitterbridge to tell Lord Mace that the Boy King's garrison was ringed with knives, that the river could not be used, that if Mace would march he must do it with his own wagons in good order, with bread enough to feed 10,000 for 10 days, and with the understanding that if he drove Stannis off he would do it not by sea but by sword in the mud under the walls. The Tyrells were vines. They did not love mud. Time took on a flavor then like stale bread. Davos's men grew lean and then leaner still. Stannis's lords complained in new ways each day. Lord Valerion thought blockade beneath their dignity. Lord Celtigar thought coin grasping. Ser Axel Florent saw in hunger a reason to burn men who murmured of the 7. Men across the line started fires under their pots and boiled netted fish and stared at the city as if staring could shorten hunger in other men's bellies. It did not. Stannis walked his lines sometimes, a single rider among ships, in a boat with 2 oars and no ornament. He had lost the look of a man peering toward dawn. He had acquired the look of a man with his jaw clenched on iron. You could attack now, Lord Valerion said one evening aboard his Valerion tower ship, where the painted mermaids along the bulwarks laughed open-mouthed. They are gnawing their belts. The soldiers complain their rations are weevilled. The king's steward was seen buying barley from a hedge which, why sit while fruit falls? Gather it. We will not be the fruit that falls into wildfire, Stannis said. He did not raise his voice, but the decorum shrank in the room like a dog tossed hot coals. I will not undo the work of patience in a day of impatience. Axel Florent puffed himself red as a wineskin. Then let the Lord of Light open the gates, he said. My queen has a holy woman at her right hand. She casts shadows that kill. Let her cast one that opens doors. I do not command shadows, Melisandre said, her red silk whispering. There is cost. We have paid enough in that coin already, and our king is great enough to win without such small and ugly magic. The flames show me a different path. It had better be one that can be walked, Stannis said. I am done with paths that climb sky. Davos said nothing. He had no counsel to give that he had not given already, and a thing said too often becomes wind. Yet from the way the sea lay and the way gulls flew, a thought had come to him, small and persistent. The chain lay sleeping yet under the river. The winch houses took many men to work them. If the city were to try some bold climbing, some half-mad run with boats in Ross the river mouths, There would be men at the winches, many men, more than the Mudgate's captains would like to park at the Mudgate while hungry men pulled bread from bakers' carts. It was a thought like a fish nibbling at a line. It was Varys, of course, who tugged that line. Davos woke one night to a skiff grating his ladder and a smell of strange oil and spice. Frezin caught a lantern behind canvas, and in its light stood a man whose garments made no sound and whose perfume made the air feel slick. No one of import came suavely out to a blockade fleet at night without dying if he came in the wrong mood. Only one man could survive such habits. "I come to you as an old acquaintance," said the spider. He was not rugged tonight. He wore silks like a serving girl's dream. "And as a man who keeps his word to those who keep theirs, I make a habit of debts properly balanced. Not all do so." "Speak," Davos said. He had no patience left for any of the spider's furniture of phrases. "The city is a pot that has boiled dry," Varys said pleasantly, as if discussing new rugs. "There are cracks in it in places that are not meant to crack. The gold cloaks quarrel with the red cloaks. Ser Jacelyn Bywater is at odds with the Lannister who replaced Janos Slynt, and with the Boy King's collar. The queen would sooner eat the imp than bread. Hunger eats all. A fever rises in the streets at night. It is contagious. I have seen it before in Pentos. It is very ugly at the end. Men breaking doors and then bones, fire started by children, women with bread knives learning how easily a throat opens. I am a gentle soul. I would not wish to see King's Landing learn too much too quickly." "What do you want?" Davos asked. Varys smiled. "It is not always want. Sometimes it is what I do not want. I do not want the green fire to bloom as it is meant to. I do not want Tyrion Lannister to be remembered as a man who burned a river. He will be remembered in other ways. His sister sees to that. I do not want the Boy King to do a thing that will make men sing songs his grandchildren will feel ashamed to hear. I do not want to live in a city with ashes between my toes. I do not want," he shrugged. "This list grows long, as you see. You can open a door," Davos said. "Better," Varys cooed. "I can close a door and watch while men on the wrong side beat upon it. The winch houses. At the hour I name, there will be fewer men there than is prudent. The chain will be lowered to let certain boats out. That was the imp's plan. At the hour I name, my little friends will do certain things with the little hammers I have given them. The chain may not be raised with the quickness the imp desires. It may be that small men bearing a very big chain will find themselves delayed. It may be that a gate will stand ajar at the wrong instant. These are small things. They require small knives and soft shoes, not shadows. If a certain number of boats were to lie in wait against the current at the mouth of the river, with oars wrapped and men who know how to run, with quiet feet, such men might find themselves inside the city before anyone had time to make speeches about their lack of invitations. "You betray the Lannisters," Davos said. Varys raised his brows. "Betrayal is a sermon men preach to the wrong congregations. I am a loyal servant of the realm." Davos looked at him for a long breath. "Why tell me? Because you know how to row?" Varys said, and smiled so wide it was a shadow of a child's grin. "And because you will not praise me. Praise is a poison that men swallow too easily. It is better to give them work." That night the blockade line thinned as if a rope had been frayed by the sea and then drawn back together in stronger strands. The red wine galleys held the outer arc and pretended not to watch anything at all. Sala's galley drifted with one sail slack as a wet leaf. Davos's skiff, with men who trusted him and who could run on timber like cats, slid into a position that left him tasting clean terror. He was too old for this, he thought. He did it anyway. The hour Varys named came with no drum. It came in the way the river shifted, in a small gust that smelled of turned earth from upriver, in a dog's bark that did not repeat. Then a lantern winked once on the far tower of the mud gate and did not wink again. The river sighed as the great chain began to move. The sound was small and private, stone on stone, iron on wood, and then the chain was down and the river mouth a dark jaw opened to swallow. 3 Dromans slid out with no cats now, and with their oars biting like teeth. 2 were filled with armed men. The 3rd was filled with fear. Men in that boat would later swear it was Stannis himself among them, and others would swear it was some humorless, unblinking knight who had never learned to smile, and others would swear it was a ghost with onions on his breath. Davos did not love any of those versions and did not care. He rowed. He made his men row as if each pull would pay for a sun. The current bit him and he bit it back, teeth in salt. On the walls men shouted. The shouts were confused, coming from too many throats and saying too many things. Close the chain. Hold. The king. Fire. No fire came. Something in the winch house clanged angrily. A figure in white and gold, the king's guard, leaned out of a window with a crossbow and loosed twice into the dark and hit nothing. On the river 3 dramens slid like eels. Cables hissed. Hooks flew. A grapple bit stone at the foot of the mud-spattered wall below the king's gate, and men swarmed from boat to rope like ants. Davos's oars thumped soft across the backs of men who were already climbing. He went up at their heels, old arms, strong arms, hands that had once worked illegal oars now working legal ropes. His shoulder banged stone and his thigh banged iron, and his breath tasted blood and salt. At the top there was a lip, and a hand came down to take his wrist, and he went over into a world of shouting and steel and slippery footing. It was like 100 other street fights Davos had seen in 100 ports, and not at all like any. Men grappled on the walkway, and someone's helmet rang against stones, and a red cloak slewed a man into the open with a hook under his knee, and a king's guard in white both glittered and was not seen for spray and sudden torch smoke. The mud gate's inner arch yawned ahead, half open, and within was the stink of hot horses and fear. Gold cloaks had their hands on the winch and were shouting new orders at each other, orders that bounced around like stones in a pot. Davos saw a short man on a balk of wood, shouting in a furious, precise voice, striking at a man twice his height with something like a rod of iron. He wore no helm, and his hair stuck up as if it had been forgotten by a comb. He should have been easy to kill. No one seemed able to do it. "Shut it!" someone screamed. "Shut it, shut it, shut it!" "Hold!" someone else yelled, and then a boy's voice cracked and broke. There was no holding. The gate was open, and then it was open wider, and then 3 of Stannis's men had shoved their way into the passage, their shields raising a wind, and after them came more. The chain ground and then stopped grinding, and then started again and then stopped, and men with smears of soot on their faces turned to fight because something had told them to stop turning a wheel. Davos went forward because he could not stop. The passage was a funnel, stone-walled and full of sound the way a flask is full of sour wine. He could no longer tell friend from foe by clothes. Not here, not in the crush. Men smelled of sour, iron, fear. He said Stannis's name without knowing he said it. He saw a face he knew, Ser Mandon Moore's blank white vexed face, and felt something hiss past his ear close enough to comb his hair. A shield hit him low and stole his breath. He stumbled and then was up again. He did not know what he struck, but his arm told him he had struck it hard. At the end of such moments, men always said later that time ran like a hare or crawled like a worm. For Davos it did both. The gate gave up at some point. It was simply done. The bolt went back. The chain went slack. Men went through the throat of the city, and once through, made space for others. The gold cloaks did not break so much as come apart in handfuls. Some fought well and died well. Some threw down what they held and ran. Some chose to become other men in an instant and live. They pushed into streets that were full of expectant echoes. The city had been waiting, and then at once it knew what it had been waiting for and began to make the noise it had not dared make. The cry that rises when a pot boils over, when a board splits under a too heavy weight, when men have been silent too long. Thrones had been won with less din. If there was a plan beyond the opening of the gate, it was now carried on the shoulders of men who had swords and knew which direction the Red Keep lay. "Oldi, our ranks," a voice shouted to the men around Davos. A voice he had heard on the water, hard as iron made into a lance. It was not Stannis. It was one of Stannis's knights, stone pure in his loyalty and unblinking in his belief that the way before him was straight. "Hold," Davos echoed, though he had never thought himself one to say that word like a commander. But it was the word that mattered. Hallways must be held as walls are held. Docks must be held. Streets must be held long enough that someone with a firm jaw could walk them and not be shoved aside. The Red Keep did not yield to the first push. It did not truly yield at all. It withdrew into itself and drew its bridges up. Maegor's Holdfast was a jewel in a shell. Its bridges came up and stayed up. Who could blame it? Queens had died badly in that place. The Queen did not intend to repeat their songs. Once the Mud Gate was theirs and the King's Gate beyond it. The rest was work, difficult and ugly and endless. Davos learned another man's voice that day. A Lannister voice that issued commands in clipped phrases, always precise, never repeated. Tyrion's, the imps, answered with curses from Clegane, with pleading from Pycelle, with something like counsel from a man who must be the Cell's word Bronn. Tyrion did not sound like a man in command so much as a man who had built a thing and could not stop describing its parts as they flew apart. Davos glimpsed him once in the press, his face smeared with soot, his lip cut, and his eyes hot. He had no business using a spear in that narrow place and did it well anyway. He glimpsed someone else too in a wedge of men-at-arms in red and gold that blocked a side street. A girl with hair the color of old bronze, a solemn mouth, a cloak embroidered with lemon flowers. Her mate seized her arm and dragged her, and she looked back once at something. A dog? A burned man? The moment was too quick for Davos's eyes, but it left him with a kind of certainty, though certainty of what he could not say. By dusk there were Stannis's men at every gate and on every wall. Some of the gold cloaks had been replaced. Some had not. Some kept their cloaks and changed their allegiance as easily as other men changed their boots. That was a truth of cities. The markets were closed. The streets were still. The Red Keep rang full of alarms like a struck bell. Stannis entered just before dark. Not on a great horse, not with trumpets, not with banners unfurled and gold dust in men's hair. He came on foot with a hard face and a sword bare. Melisandre walked 3 paces behind him, her hair bright as if there were a sunset that belonged only to her. The men about Stannis were the ones who had kept their shields where they must be. Davos found himself a dozen paces off, and that was space enough. The king mounted Aegon's high hill not as a conqueror but as a man who had never left it, and the men around watched him as if he could set the stone to rights by striking it. He did not look right or left. Somewhere within the keep a child began to cry. With night the city's fear worsened. Night was always when fear did its best work. But by midnight the crier that had been running through the streets calling men to arms had fallen silent, and the only voices were those of guards and the small thin crying of women comforting children. A first rain came and hit the warm streets and turned them into a fragrance that would have been sweet if it had not been mixed with old smoke. In the morning, with no trumpet to announce it, a single bridge from Maegor's Holdfast lowered with a shriek of rusty iron. A shove of Lannister men in white and gold came across it like men pushed by a hand. They threw down weapons as they came and prostrated themselves, and turned when an order was shouted and prostrated again. And at last a woman came, cold and erected with green eyes stung bright in a pale face, her hair a net, her mouth a slash. She led a boy in velvet who still thought himself a king because no one had yet told him otherwise. The woman's eyes did not bend. They were eyes that had learned hatred in the cradle. There was no humility in the set of her head. There was no surrender in the shape of her hands. "Cersei of House Lannister," Stannis said. He did not raise his sword. He might have been passing judgment on a wall. "You are accused of putting a bastard on the Iron Throne and of lying to your king and to the realm. Joffrey of House Lannister, your son, is accused of sitting a throne that is not his. You will be held until guilt be established or disproved." A man in white sidled and tried to stand between mother and son and king. Men in brown and blue with stag brooches took him politely by the arms and moved him aside. The boy king's mouth worked like a child who wanted not to cry. He looked for his grandsire and found no one. Then he looked at his mother and found a mirror of his own fear. Davos waited for her to spit words that would tear at men like hooks. She did not. She held her boy's shoulder until her nails whitened, and she watched Stannis as if she could make him burst into flame by staring. "You preach justice," she said at last, soft as silk over steel. "Do it, then." "It is not a soft thing." "It is not," Stannis said. He did not glance toward Melisandre. It will be done. That morning Davos watched them seat Stannis in the throne room. It had an air half ruined and half accustomed to ruin. Tapestries were down. Cushion was torn. The throne itself looked what it was. A madness from an old madman's vision. Stannis stood before it for a long space with his hand on the pommel of a sword grounded in its scabbard. Joe Buckwell muttered a prayer. Lord Celtigar of Claw muttered something else. Melisandre watched with a hunger that made Davos's skin prickle. Stannis sat at last without ceremony. The sword went to a squire's hand. There was no cheer. The hall breathed. It was, Davos thought, the most honest seating of a king he had ever seen. It was not meant to please. It was not meant to dazzle. It was meant to endure. The work began as such work always began, with lists. Men came with writs in hands, with tails that were thin as soup and with ledgers that weighed like pigs. Grain must be accounted for. Men-at-arms must be paid with coin that was now a rumor. The Septons must be told there was a king. The small folk must be told there was bread, though there was little. If there were words to be spoken to keep men from boiling over, Melisandre spoke none of them. But Davos saw that words were spoken anyway by others, and men calmed as if oil had been poured. He suspected Varys's thin hands stirring the pot. By noon Lord Mace Tyrell had learned a thing that spoiled his appetite for the lamb above all other things. The Lion Boy's city had fallen without a battle to make songs about. His men ate anyway. Men of the Reach were good at that. Then Mace's maesters and far-sighted, near-sighted counselors and that weasel Peter Baelish who could talk a man out of the boots he was wearing whispered in his ear. The words made his ears hot. Did Lord Mace truly wish to lead his banners against a city that could no longer be taken by battle? A city that imprudent devils held whom he did not dare claim as lawful foe because the realm might decide they were not devils at all? Would he risk his bannermen's lives and his daughter's future to put back on the throne a boy whom the city had just watched led down from his mother's side by men who did not swagger? Would he set himself against a king who spoke of justice and had already made good on the first half of that word? Law? Lord Mace was a brave man in the way of large men whose appetites encouraged cheer. He liked the sound of trumpets best of all songs. But he liked losing least of all. He kept his tents at Bitterbridge. He chewed lamb and pretended to be in the right place because he had always intended to be there. The Redwyne fleet held to Stannis's line. Paxter Redwyne sent a courteous letter that described his position no more than was necessary. His Grace sits the throne, he wrote in a hand that looked like wine spilled and then wiped up. We hold the sea. Long may the harvest be just. Davos read the letter before it went and felt the man's tug between father, vassal, and lord. Men like Paxter could live between such tugs all their lives and die fat in their beds. Davos did not envy them. He suspected Paxter did not envy himself. By sunset of that long day Stannis had decreed 3 small mercies and 1 large thing. The mercies were these: that bread seized in quantity not be hoarded but apportioned by ward under the eyes of true men, that no woman accused of theft for hunger be maimed until winter grew harder and justice could be measured with less haste, and that no pyromancer's fire be lit for sport until his grace declared it needed for war. The large thing was that the boy, Joffrey, be not slain out of hand. You will try him, Stannis said flat as an old table. We will not make a martyr of him for fools to bleed their hearts over. I will not be the king who slaughters a child and declares it justice. I will do what is needful when the need is proved. Cersei's eyes showed a horror that could not be contained in them. It was the horror of a mother who had expected a certain death and been given another. The hall breathed again. Davos felt somewhere behind his breastbone a pride that was like a bruise. That night the rain came for true and washed the rest of the soot from the roofs. The river swelled and banged at the pilings with brown fists. Davos lay awake in a chamber that smelled of stone dust and sea salt and listened to a city learn to sleep. At some hour that might have been before dawn or after it, he heard a dog howl as if it had had its heart removed. He slept then in spite of himself and dreamed of onions rolling loose in a small boat, bumping his knees. He woke to a city in the first thin light of day. Men swept. Women boiled water and washed the blood from stoops and sent boys to fetch more and made an art of going on. That was work Davos respected above all others. He went down to the river and found the Black Betha afloat between two piers. She looked smaller in this place of riotous stone and old pride. Frezin lifted a hand. The boy looked twice the age he had looked 3 weeks before. Sala waved as if he had never waved to any man in his life and was making up for it now. On a red wine galley, two small shapes ran together and fell over each other laughing, and their father stood with hands on hips and allowed himself one audible laugh and looked about quickly to see who had noticed. The world had not grown kind, only possible. Word came up from the riverlands like mud in flood, carrying the smell of rain. Tywin Lannister had been marching. Tywin Lannister, who did not love to fail, had been forced to will like a dog who finds his garden gate barred, and he had put out his hand toward Bitterbridge, and in his hand had found not an alliance but a tangle of vines. Mace Tyrell did not wish to fight the man who sat the Iron Throne when the city had not bled for him. He did not wish to give up the marriage he had been promised, either. He wanted both things, which made him like any other lord, but sometimes one must choose his supper out of two bowls that cannot both be eaten. Tyrell sent soft words. Lannister sent hard ones. Baelish smiled and whispered to both until they walked in a small circle, never wholly touching. Varys watched and fed pigeons. "War is not done," Stannis said to the hall, and his voice made the flagstones feel colder. "We have the throne, and we have a city that must be taught not to gnaw its own hands. The North is at war. The Riverlands are at war. The Iron Men gnaw the Reach. A sickness is coming with winter. We will be a wall or we will be bones under its foot. There is no third thing." Davos stood in tea. He had learned to stand, weight on one good leg, the sea in his marrow, and he thought of the path they had walked and the path before. He had rowed a skiff into King's Landing to steal 2 boys and had rowed other boats into the city's heart to pry open a gate. And he had not burned. No part of him had burned. He made himself be grateful. It was not a thing that came naturally. Gratitude had to be practiced like prayer. He went to the kitchens and stood where the smells were hard and honest. He watched a woman with arms like hams ladle out a thin stew of barley, onions, and what might once have been a rabbit. She had a way with a ladle that brooked no argument. She spoke to a boy whose face was all eyes. "It is Stannis's," she said, when the boy asked where the bread had come from. "He took it from men who would keep it. You will say thank you." "Thank you," the boy whispered, not to her and not to any man in particular, but to the bowl he held. Davos did not think the Lord of Light would care for such thanks. He did not think the Seven would either. The gods were not eaters of barley. But he found his mouth had made the shape of the same words by itself. He felt foolish afterward and then less foolish. He thought of Devon somewhere in this city, a page now, a boy in the train of Melisandre, learning to say different prayers than the ones he had learned at his father's board. He thought of his other sons, of the sea as they had known it and not known it, and he saw in a flash like lightning a path that ran north to snow and ended in a wall made not for kingship but for men. He went out into the rain that had softened the city's angles. He went toward his ship because that was the only place he had never gone wrong. Behind him the Iron Throne sat and did not move, as if it had never moved and never would. In front of him the river breathed, and beyond it the bay, and beyond that the sea that remembered every oath a man ever broke. By afternoon armed men had been posted at the bread yards, and the worst of the hunger had been halted with the promise of tomorrow's bread. Cersei had been led to a chamber where the window looked over a part of the city that was too far away to do her much good. Joffrey had cried until he had no voice for crying, and then had learned to speak in whispers to the boy who brought him water. Tyrion Lannister had slept for an hour with his head on his arms, and then had sat up and started to list things. Sansa Stark had not been seen. Sandor Clegane had been seen rideless and helmetless, his face slack and his eyes like burned glass, and then had not been seen again, as if a dog had slipped its collar and vanished into dark alleys, and was now a rumor told by boys daring each other to go near the river at midnight. Loras Tyrell had ridden a horse in a circle at Bitterbridge so fast his shadow could not keep up, and then had thrown himself down in a tent and cursed into a pillow. Marjorie had taken a book into her lap and looked at the words and not read them. Paxter Redwine had gotten drunk and then carefully sober again and written a letter in a neat hand to a cousin in Old Town about the proper way to tighten a tilting-top mast. Stannis Baratheon had eaten an apple and a heel of bread and drunk water and taken counsel about the North and said he would speak to the man the North had crowned when there was a road that did not lead through drowning. Night came, and with it another noise from the city, a different one. It was not riot. It was not victory. It was that mixed hum cities have when they dare once more to think the dawn will come without knives. Davos listened to it with his hand on the rail and the pouch bumping his breastbone and told himself that boats and justice were not such different things. You pulled both with both hands. You met a force bigger than yourself with stubbornness and skill and an unwillingness to let go. It was almost simple when you put it like that. A gull came and perched where gulls always perched on the Black Betha, on the same worn board by the aft rail. It cocked its head at Davos as if to say, "You are not a gull and you will never be one." And Davos cocked his head back, because there were some conversations worth having and some that were only the sea chaffering with itself. A hand touched his elbow then, light and not quite sure it was welcome. He turned and found Devon, taller than he remembered, with the looks of a boy grown around edges too quickly. "Father," Devon said, and for a moment he was a boy again, and then he was a page, and then he was something else entirely, a man with more than one allegiance to hold in his two hands. "They said," I asked. "I thought you might be here." "I am always here," Davos said, and made his voice light to spare the boy embarrassment. "If not here, then a place like it. What do you, lad? Do you wear red now always?" Devon glanced down at the dark wool tunic with a small red thread stitched along the hem and shrugged awkwardly. "The Queen says the Lord of Light has work for me. I am only a page." "We are all only something," Davos said. "That is why kings look the way they do. They are only kings." Devon's mouth tugged to the side. "Ser Axel says the Queen has seen in the flames that winter will be long, and that the dead will." "Aye," Davos said. "We will learn what the dead will do soon enough. For now we have bread and we have kept the river from burning. That is more than I can hold in my two hands already. Do not try to hold everything. You will spill." Devon stood with him then and said nothing and watched the gull. The city breathed. The sea whispered. The sky was heavy. Davos felt that weight on his shoulders and accepted it. He had rowed for it. He would row again. It was a strange thing to look toward the north from the deck of a ship in King's Landing and feel the pull from a place where water froze in beards and men learned the weight of silence. But he felt it as sure as he felt the sway underfoot and the smell of pitch. Stannis would be pulled too. Men like them did not get to choose the direction of their pulls, only how they braced their legs. "Tell his grace," Davos said quietly after a time, "that the sea is his, that the Redwine men will hold it so long as coin and honor hold, that the city is quiet today, and tomorrow may be quieter if men are fed, and noisier if they are not. Tell him I have seen fewer torches at the winch houses. They will have learned something from last night. They will work to learn the other half. He should not expect the same door to be open twice." Devon nodded solemn as a little priest. "I will. Tell him too," Davos went on, surprising himself at the boldness that had come. Boldness had always found him on decks and deserted roads and sewer mouths, not in halls. "That I have seen men walk steadier for a king who keeps his word than for one who keeps his sword bare. He keeps his word. He may not think that matters. It does." Devon considered. "He will not like to hear that." "I know." Davos smiled, and the smile did not feel wrong on his face. "That is why it must be said. It did not end with bread, any more than wars end with a signature and a tired smile. But bread mattered. Bread and the absence of green fire mattered. The arbormaster's galleys mattered, their oars dipping and lifting in rhythms that would in time be as hated in the city as any tax and then in time after that be ignored the way men ignore air. Paxter Redwine's sons ran along their father's deck and learned how to swear with men who had never seen a grape and how to take a prize without killing what must be sold. Mace Tyrell ground his teeth and whispered and waited, and then chose late and badly, and that was a story for a winter tent with deer fat on the fire. Tywin Lannister learned to listen harder and ride farther and count nights differently. Peter Baelish counted everything and made a game of counting. Varys fed his birds and watched with that round face smiling and his eyes that never smiled. Melisandre looked north, and in the reflection of her ruby the world's ice cracked a little. Davos slept that night with one hand on the pouch he wore, as he always had, not because he feared its theft but because a man needs some hardness to lay his heart against when it grows tender. He slept with the sound of water in his ears and the weight of a city on his chest and the ghost of a gate under his hands. When he woke, the dawn had made the sea into hammered silver and the air tasted briefly clean. The city coughed once like a man who has worked off a fever in the night. Somewhere far off there was a cry that sounded almost like relief. The gull took off and flew without looking back. He thought of the day he'd brought onions to Storm's End, how he'd not known until afterward that a single small thing could set a world upon its new hinge. He thought now that he had rowed a narrower boat into a darker place and brought out two boys who were not kings and had done it with a smuggler's hard hands and a father's stubbornness. There were moments men never recognized when they stood within them, moments that cut paths. On the day that Stannis Baratheon was properly named before the Sept and swore on a Septon's book to do justice as best he knew how, it rained again, a soft warm rain that smelled of less fear than most rain had smelled of in the city for a year. The Septon's voice trembled. The king's did not. Melisandre watched with no more expression than if she were watching a brazier. Cersei laughed once like a biting thing and bit her lip bloody when a guard touched her arm. Joffrey did not look up. Sansa did not attend. One small boy in the crowd whispered to his mother that he had never seen a king so plain. His mother shushed him and then nodded and did not know why she did the latter. Old men who had watched 3 kings and 1 madman thought it was an ugly throne and would always be. In the docks, men coiled lines and checked knots and counted fish. There is a steadiness to such work that bleeds into a man's bones if he does it long enough. Davos did such work and felt it bleed into his bones, and made a prayer to no one in particular that the city might learn such steadiness. He smiled when a boy carrying a basket of small loaves kissed the bread as if it were a religious thing and then caught himself and looked around. He watched a red wine rise and fall and rise again in distant practice and thought that a rope weighted with promises would hold longer than any chain cunningly made. The sea remembered every oath a man ever broke. But sometimes Davos thought, standing with his hand on the Black Betha's rail and watching the summer's last gull vanish toward the place where the pale horizon devoured small brave things, the sea remembered, too, the nights a man rode in the dark because he had given his word, and was content for a little while, and kept its storms for other men.